It is no secret that Unreal Engine is the engine of choice for real-time virtual production. So virtual production is not solely just LED walls. Virtual
Thank you
production
for saying that. Thank you for
covers a
saying
lot
that.
of different things.
Apart from Unreal Engine, what other software is used to make a virtual production setup?
You can start off with a webcam, Unreal Engine, a laptop. You don't necessarily have to go to school for a lot of what we're doing in visual effects. Specialists are still very much in demand. All the big studios are experimenting with this stuff too.
Is gatekeeping a thing for all this knowledge?
NeRFs are in this evolutionary stage. So then we start getting into fun talks of like LOD structure and optimization, and baked versus dynamic lighting is always a hot topic. It's never a bad thing to learn more about cinematography and photography. The best ways you can do that is
Let's
3,
go.
2, 1.
Are you ready, Faras?
Of course I am. Everybody, welcome back to the Bad Decisions podcast, where we give you guys a backstage pass into the minds and brains of creatives, entrepreneurs, and visionaries from all domains. And today we're turning into
virtual production, because we have the cinematographer, VFX, and virtual production supervisor who has worked with the world's leading visual effects studios such as Dimension Studio, DNEG. He also previously worked at Apple, GoPro, Autodesk.
So everybody, here's a toast to Jim Geduldick. How are you, Jim?
good. I'll toast back.
Thank you.
Wow.
There you go.
There
That's
you
what I'm
go. We have
talking
a guest
about,
with
my
coffee.
man.
That's amazing.
How many cups of coffee do you drink a day?
You know what? I usually try to have like the morning espresso, and then I'm good. Just because I know if I have too much from previous history that, unless I level it off without eating something by like 1 or 2, you get the, espresso jitters. But yeah, I'm not like a 12-cup coffee type of person. It's just, that's too much caffeine.
But you stay so long in the sets, like these long hours, you don't need coffee? Like once in the morning and you're good to go?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes in the afternoon you get one if you're lucky. Crafty has like the good snacks on set, and
Okay.
they might have like sometimes you might get a good DIT that has like a little espresso maker at their cart. But I don't know. There's so much excitement that goes on sets that sometimes that's the adrenaline besides caffeine. So you don't need to be pumping Red Bulls and other energy drinks. There's enough to keep you busy on set.
I love that. The thing is, we here we're big coffee lovers. Actually, this podcast used to be called Bad Decisions Coffee Break, and then we just took out the coffee break because it was just too long. But essentially speaking, we're the kind of people who drink multiple cups a day. As long as we need to work, we're like, okay, chug another one. But we know eventually one day we'll be like, okay, guys, that's enough. Because we do get the espresso jitters as well, but sometimes I feel like it's like a drug, It is like a drug. It is a legal drug. There you go.
I mean, we could do a whole podcast on coffee and good espresso and talking about like good beans and not burning your beans if you do it at home versus going to like a local roaster or something. So yeah, I can definitely taste the difference of like good espresso versus bad. I guess I've got the palate now of being spoiled by good espresso.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, 100%. You get that after you try so many different cups of coffee. That's like natural. It comes naturally. But like you said, we can leave the coffee talk for another day. Let's start talking about Threads, because it's been a crazy journey over the past 24 hours since Threads was launched as a new social media platform.
5 million,
10 million or something.
5 million sign up in the first 4 hours.
Oh, yeah.
In the first 4 hours, they got 5 million sign ups. And the best part was the onboarding process. So you go in, it's connected to your Instagram, you follow everybody if you want to. But still, have you got the hang of it? Or like, what do you think?
It's a little weird in the navigation. I would say the setup was really easy. Just click on the ticket, in the search bar, and it ports over your friends and followers. Like I think I met my follower max, and I had to unfollow a bunch of people because I was like, wow, I follow way too many people, and I can't keep track of everybody that's doing all the cool stuff on Instagram. So I had to unfollow some accounts that I just didn't pay attention to as much anymore. And the Thread side was cool because tons of people from visual effects, animation, filmmaking, art, music, all like jumped over Threads, as soon as it launched. So it's cool. So it's like, I think everybody's like, okay, we're here now. What do we do?
You know what's
And
funny? I didn't do. Sorry to cut you off. I didn't do what you did. I think Farah did the same thing, but as you, I didn't actually follow all the people I follow on Instagram. I wanted to start all fresh and just
Good luck. You have good luck going through all your friend lists and following.
No,
one by
I don't
one.
want to go and follow the friend list anymore. I actually want to see, is there any new creative people that I might have missed out on Instagram because it's so saturated, where I can actually follow new people now. So I'll pick and cherry pick like all the new people that I might have not known. I think this is a good chance to do that as well. That's why I went that route.
yeah, I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot of noise, I would say, on all the different platforms, especially for people in the different industries that we're following or interested in, and in tech and AI and machine learning and visual effects and filmmaking and and art in general. And there's so much of content that's being put out, whether it be content makers like yourselves or just people in the industry. It's funny because there's a lot of people that are in the industry at a very high level that are kind of just very just going in like dark mode. There's not a lot of fanfare. Like there's very, very, very amazing like DPs and visual effects artists and soups and animators and sound designers that are on these platforms, but they either don't use their name, or if they do, they don't post very often, either because they're busy or because they're off living life and just posting on social media all the time. So there's a lot of people to follow. There's a lot of cool things that everybody's following because everybody's jumping on NeRFs and AI and generative AI and like using all these different things in new ways. So there's a lot of content to get through to be like, oh, where did this source even come from? Because a lot of the, influencers post, but they don't always credit back, and you have to go into their comments to be like, oh, this is so-and-so's work. Like, that kind of, it's kind of a pain, but it's like, oh, I want to get to the person or the artist that did this or experimented. Like, let me get back to that original person. So if I reshare it, I want to reshare from, that person that actually did this, crazy, volumetric thing with like a bunch of GoPros, or messed around with like Wonder Dynamics and did this really cool like animation with the dance scene and, whatever IK rig they got from like Wonder Dynamics or something.
100%.
I just had one question, because Jim brought up a really good point, that there's a lot of people on top that are actually either not posting or not posting enough. What I think would be really powerful if we can see all these people who are really on top and who are really have the knowledge, especially about things that people really don't know about, NeRFs, volumetric scan, photogrammetry, and if they share their knowledge, I believe like there would be more people gets interested into all this stuff and they want to do more.
I agree with Jim. The one issue is time, right? They're working so much on the stuff they're producing, and so they just don't have the time we, for example, have to create the content, because creating content around the work is literally the other half. It's if you're spending 50% of your time creating, you need to spend the other 50% doing the content and marketing the content and posting it, put the captions, and now there's Threads, so there's an extra platform for you to post on. And so a lot of these top performers who Jim has mentioned, for example, in different industries, they just don't have the time, or maybe they're just not fond of putting, content out there. I've seen those type of people, and it's a shame, because if they put out their work, first of all, we're gonna be out of business. Like it's just they're so good at what they do.
Good. Competition is great. Always good. Like I would love to see people creating cool stuff.
Yeah.
And it would motivate us to create better 100%, stuff too, right? Like,
to level up to their level. 100%.
It's hard, even for myself, who I like to share when I can. It's just when you get in the thick of it, other than NDAs, which can span years for you to talk about certain projects that you are on, or sometimes you can't even talk about projects for until they're officially announced. It is hard, because it's not just a matter of like, time management to find it. It's just like sometimes when you get offset, or you're, on a project for months or over a year, or sometimes multi-years, it's like, how do you find the energy? And, more power to like the early days of Beeple, with Mike is like I remember going to his site very, very early in when he would post all his Cinema 4D projects, and I would use his posts to break down projects because he was doing different type of visuals back then than what he is known for today. But like the Everdays started, and he would post them all, and he's been doing it, for really, really long time of just like sharing his information. Not so much the tutorials, but like his old website was just like put up the Cinema 4D projects, basically use that as a base and go like, oh, how did he get that? And that's how I got into a lot of this stuff, is like, connecting with people, contemporaries of that day that were in like motion graphics and filmmaking and, illustration and design. And you had, the Beeples, the Gap Stranges, you had, tons of like Danny Yount, you had like all these people that were amazing that I looked up to in like motion graphic design and visual effects. And you always wanted to know like, well, how did they do this amazing thing? And BTS was nowhere near accessible as what it is today because of social media. So it's like usually you had to wait if like some kind of like EPK video came out for that project, or that, that studio, did a breakdown, or you got like, the DVD extra, or you bought the book, not like with every major feature that comes out, there's usually an art of that feature that comes out, which is amazing. Those books are probably some of my favorite. But yeah, information for education is much easier. Kind of like what you guys are doing with your experimenting is like, it's way easier today, which makes it to be harder because I kind of say there's no excuses left to just go out and experiment. So if somebody's like, oh, well, I don't have access to a Red camera, or I don't have access to this, crazy Threadripper Pro, like crazy Unreal system, it's kind of no excuse. You can get a baseline, computer laptop from like a Best Buy or Amazon. You don't need the craziest, digital cinema camera, or even the craziest, like, digital SLR these days. Like you can do a lot with an iPhone and a GoPro and a okay baseline, like laptop. And we see it, like we see and I'm going to forget his name, but he's awesome. He's that like 14 or 15-year-old kid from Canada, who animated, the Lego piece that he did in Blender.
I saw the post
and then
about that. I don't know his name, but I saw
hired
the
for
post.
Spider-Verse. Yeah, he's like 14 or 15 years old. Really, really cool kid who has a YouTube. We'll have to find it and link it. But he got hired, by the directors, of the Spider-Verse that just came out, and he got invited to animate a section in his style, in that kind of Lego, animation style that fit really well. So you've got kids that are all younger than us that have these things, and they're just experimenting. I mean, that's the thing. It's like back to they have the time, and when you're in school, you've got nothing but time to experiment. When you're kind of in the field, you have to balance it. And like, I struggle with that too. It's like, oh, here's this new thing. Can I use this for work, for what I do, or do I just set time aside and jump into like, everything from, hey, any of these new AI platforms, or any of these new tools, or, beta plugins, or anything Unity drops or Unreal drops, or, so it's like, you got to find the right things in there. Or you might see an inspirational video and go, okay, this person did this in Blender, and they did it in Blender and Unreal. They used a Rococo suit. They did this, that. Okay, that's a cool thing. Like, I have that stuff. Let me go try it. Or, beg, borrow, steal. You got a friend, you know somebody, you can rent it, you can, do whatever to try to get the equipment you need to do it, and just experiment.
So it's beautiful what you brought up about the concept of the kid being hired and the opportunities that are available today. Even though, we see a lot in the comments where a lot of people are asking for jobs, they don't know where to look. If they are in Unreal Engine, in Blender, Cinema 4D, yet there are other opportunities, like you mentioned, like the kid who just uploaded a bunch of videos about himself doing the Lego. And for that very reason, he was hired to be part of the Spider-Man universe. The question I want to ask is, let's go back to your journey. How different was film and cinema and this industry in general from the moment you started? What was it like back then? And then we can slowly, come back to where we are today. We want to hear about how you started and how different it was.
Well, I started mainly because my thing was not even chasing to be, a visual effects artist or a cinematographer when I first started. It was mainly because of skateboarding. That's what got me into filmmaking, is I wanted to be a pro skater, pro snowboarder. And, the early intro into filmmaking came because of skateboard videos and people that I looked up to in that realm. Mike Chernasky's, Jacob Rosenberg, Stacy Peralta's, Mac Dog. Like, these are Spike Jones, Ty Evans. You have all these seminal filmmakers over my growing up in skateboarding and action sports. And these were different films that were introduced to, young kids, and they weren't your traditional, like Goonies and Indiana and all that were like, feature studio things. And those were everybody aspired to be, but there was something really raw and connective for me with, skateboard films, because they were not shot well early on. It was a group of friends getting together. So like a lot of us in skateboarding really connect with a lot of the early films is because it captured an essence of like the culture, the art, the community, which is a big thing about, counterculture. I don't even want to call them sports, but the counterculture movements like skateboarding.
Right.
I could be biased to say that skateboarding, pushes the world forward in music, art, and design, and just the rawness of it. So I always related to that. I was like wanting to follow, the filmmakers that came before me. And I didn't know at that time, when I started skating, I was like 10 years old. So the first skateboard films that I got were either, a friend got one for their birthday, or we watched them at the local skate shop. And it was like, it's always things like the early Powell Peralta videos. Then you move into like the early 90s with the Plan B videos. And they were done in such a way at that time that they were groundbreaking, just the way that, we would see these big tentpole feature films made, but you're doing it with like next to no budget with your friends. And that's something I always related to. What helped me in my career is kind of coming up that do it yourself, the DIY route, which is very skate style. Definitely helped me out in when I got into more professional things and commercials and music videos and then feature films. It taught me how to do more with less.
Wow.
And that DIY route is kind of what we're seeing a lot of people work with today. Is like, you may not have the studio, but you've got the technology, and there's this thing called YouTube and social media that you don't. When I started, it was like you had to read books, or you had to go to like NYU or USC or something like that. And I didn't go to school for what I'm doing now. It's a self-taught thing.
No formal education on what you're doing right now. In terms
Not for
of
filmmaking.
early
No.
school.
No, I wanted to go, funny enough, I wanted to go either to NYU or Pratt, and I just didn't have the grades or like the track at that time to just jump into that. And I didn't have a body of work from like, say, high school. And most high school kids don't, unless they focus on it, that you go, hey, here's my, because it would be like you get your art portfolio ready to go, like, and submit it to Pratt, and then you'd have to go to the interview, or, a body of work that would have to go to film school to get you in, because, just how competitive, colleges were and are. And I'm in the proponent of like, education is really, really important, but it's like how you get that education is so much change from when I started coming up through the industry versus what it is now. There's a lot more things that are accessible. And I'm not saying, skip going to school. Like those are a lot of formative years, and it's a lot about connection and experimenting, but you don't necessarily have to go to school for a lot of what we're doing in visual effects. It's good because it gets you a base, so you've got a lot of people doing training out there for visual effects. You got, Nomon and Escape and all these like really top tier, schools that you can go to learn very key things from like industry experts that have been in the industry. But there's something said about just like getting your hands dirty and jumping into the stuff and experimenting yourself. Like that's the good thing about like the educational side, is like being left to fail at something and then figure out why that didn't work. And then when you find the answer, it goes back to those, connections of neural pathways. You go like, oh, I did it this way. It took this long. Now I know that either A, I did it wrong, or now I know the right way to do it. And next time I'll do it this way and I'll be more efficient, or I can try this new thing. So it's really cool. Some, education in any realm, not even ours, be like, hey, I'd love to learn more about how to like cultivate my own coffee beans and roast them at home. It's like, so that's more education.
How much of the people that work in these leading studios that you had the opportunity to work at have traditional education in a form of going to a college or university and studying filmmaking, versus how many of them were like you? They went on, libraries, got books, or learned from people's, behind the scenes stuff,
or experimenting, or YouTube, just trying out things at home. Nowadays you can try so many things, and you can go on, hey, I know how to work with Unreal Engine, right?
I would say it's a good mix. I mean, some of the people that have been in the industry longer definitely have come up in some traditional ways. I mean, you've got people, I know some other VFX supervisor friends that, came up same way of me, of just like wanting to learn and being really excited about, the potential of maybe not even just to get a job in visual effects or filmmaking, but just got really excited about being a storyteller, and kind of, I don't want to say fumbling their way into the industry, but, kind of finding their own path. And it's like, I think in the industry, you have to kind of keep reinventing yourself. For me anyway, too, it's like, I feel if like I don't jump on a different type of job now and then again, or do my own thing, like then I feel like I get stale. Like either I have to learn something new or try a new approach, or, tackle a new problem. And that's what's fun about working on a lot of diverse projects is, I probably would have gotten bored with a lot of this stuff if there weren't new challenges. And I think that's what's cool about working with new technology in animation and visual effects and filmmaking. And it doesn't matter if it's cameras or it's a new piece of software, or it's like, a new iPhone, it's just like, it's always like trying to do better than I've done before. And then also just try to be more efficient, because the end goal is, for those of us with family and lives outside of our work, is like, you want to wrap up work quicker and get back to the other stuff. That's a really key thing, I think, is like, you got to have the good split. And it's really hard to do the balancing between the work-life thing. Sometimes it goes way more work than it does life, but that's like, one's going to influence the other for sure.
Yeah. It's a complicated conversation to have, and I guess we're going to get to that, but I want to talk about the journey at DNEG as well, and before that, if you don't mind, just want to ask how did you get into the position of being at DNEG and Dimension Studios? Of course, these are leading studios, and a lot of people have the inspiration, motivation to go and work in positions that you did. How did you end up over there?
And how is it like working there? A lot of people are, like in different industries, people are always curious. Like, how is it working like in Google, Apple? Like, they really want to know. And since you have this position to work in these big studios, people are really curious.
Yeah, and I'm sure with your conversation with our buddy Bill previously with his Google venture, it's like, he could tell you probably had to do like 14 different interviews to get it's, it's a bit different so if I rewind it really back in being at companies like GoPro and Apple and Autodesk, um, they're different in working at companies that are, releasing products. And that's one good thing that I think was a benefit of working at different companies. Like I said, getting too comfortable in things of like leaving. I wouldn't say I left the creative field to go to some of those companies, but it was, I wanted to learn more about things. So like when I left being like a freelance cinematographer and visual effects artist for a while and went to GoPro for like almost 3 years, it was a matter of wanting to learn more about how to build cameras and software and understanding something. But that was like where my core came from too, is the connection of where a company like GoPro started resounded very well with me. I knew a lot of the early people at GoPro and had been working with them just as a filmmaker. Early on, they would like see me cameras and would give feedback. And, this was like earlier on before kind of GoPro kind of blew up. And I had a friend there. I was like, oh, you should come work with us. And I was like, yeah. They're like, when you guys are like serious and you're like make a really good product, like I'll think about it. But it's just conversations and staying in touch with people. And and one time I was just looking for something new, and then he hit me up again, and he was just like, hey, I think we're ready, and we're looking to do this. And this is like GoPro was like getting to be really on the rise. And I was like, okay, this seems like something to jump from the frustrations of freelance life, which, talk to any freelancer in any industry and they can tell you like sometimes it gets to be a pain in the ass, like you have to, when you're a freelancer, you're your own, your own CEO, you're your own, bookkeeping department, you're your own marketing department. Like it is you, unless you are in like a little boutique thing and you start like a little LLC or S corp. And, yeah, it's a different world when you jump to these bigger companies, whether it be studios or commercial companies like Fortune 500 companies. It's very eye opening for somebody that comes up from that kind of DIY route and in skateboarding. Like sometimes you clash with corporate America in that it's just like oh it's like it's got to be about the core. It's got to be about the core, and you get to understand politics really well, meaning politics within the business, not government politics, but and you get an appreciation for understanding what it takes to get products to market if you're working for a company that sells products or creates things, and it helps you in a lot of different ways when it comes to what we do, because you're learning different things about budgeting and dev cycles and marketing cycles and what it takes to get hardware and software products, which is something I didn't know previously. Like I knew it being at two hardware and software companies when you're at Apple or Autodesk or Adobe or any of these big companies. Like it takes a lot of people to get it, what we're using day to day, whether it be, Epic's tools or Adobe's tools or Apple's tools or Autodesk or, who it is. So I have a much bigger appreciation for, the development and engineering teams to go what they go through. And even independent, if you're a person that writes, a bunch of blueprint plugins and putting them up on the Epic marketplace, like that's a job unto itself, is to like package that all up and do the marketing for it and then wait and see if it gets approved by, Apple or Epic or Uni or whoever. But then, when I shifted back into kind of like, doing these stints at, these companies and different studios, you get a good look at how different workflows work, both on the corporate side and then even at like independent studios. Because I came up through the industry on the East Coast in New York City, and and I worked for a lot of different boutiques, like a lot of small VFX shops and you know, post facilities and production companies. And when you get to see how they work on different levels, from like the small shops to the really big shops of, you know, like the DNEGs, Dimensions, and, you know, Disney's and other things like that, it gives you a really good insight into how you, either as an individual artist or supervisor or whatever your position may be or that you're going for, you either need to augment, you know, certain things about your workflow style. It's one big thing about working with big teams or running big teams is being able to communicate well. It's like number one thing. It's like it's same thing on set. It's like you have to be a good communicator. You have to be good at reading people and understanding the dynamics, because it's different on set dealing with clients and studios and production teams than it is if you're just, you know, sitting in the back end of post, and sometimes you don't get one-to-one with clients, you know, unless you work at smaller shops. You know, it depends on what your role is in that. And at bigger shops, you know, it's a different approach, because there's usually lots and lots of people. If anybody stays for the credits after, you know, a TV show or a film, you know, when you get to VFX and post, like, it is, hopefully everybody gets their credits, but it is the long things, because there's usually not a project these days that doesn't get touched by visual effects, even if it's a rom-com, even if it's a, you know, a drama series. Like, something's getting touched, colors getting touched, things get composited, they get treated, pixels get manipulated in some way. It's not always the big sci-fi, you know, films or, like, you know, fantasy stuff. So visual effects and animation is just, it's everywhere. It has been. It's just more and more because of the accessibility of what you can do. And the way that, like, the Dimension DNEG thing came into fold is a really good friend of mine who was one of my former partners at Dimension, Callum McMillan. He rang me up because we actually knew each other. His brother and I worked together at GoPro, and we had worked on a bunch of projects together during the GoPro days, and we just stayed in touch. And we both had been working in you know, high speed and multi-camera array and volumetric together for a while, either separately or kind of like, I'd be working on these projects and he'd be working on these with his former company, Time Slice. And he just rang me and he's, you know, like, what are you up to? This is what we're up to. You know, at that time, Time Slice Films and Hammerhead Interactive came together, and that's what formed Dimension. And he just said, hey, this is what we're doing. You know, I paid attention to what they were up to with, you know, the volumetric stages in London and a lot of the kind of VR and AR and interactive things that they had been pushing. And I've always known Cal and the team to really pushing the next step of, like, image capture. And they were the first Microsoft volumetric capture partner in the world. So they were like the first first volumetric stage approved by Microsoft. When Microsoft had this division, they shut the division down last year. And
why did they
I
shut
joined
it down?
For Holo, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been a lot of divisions that have been shut down in some bigger companies, and sadly, we don't always know the reasons, but it sometimes comes down to the big bosses looking at what's generating enough revenue, you know, or marketing cycles. We've seen everything from GoPro to Microsoft to, you know, Apple and others, you know, kind of kill good projects or projects that just may not be in line with what their trajectory is as a company. So, yeah, it's the same thing. You know, it's like they may be done with that, but, you know, sometimes you hope they either open source it or that technology will evolve on the path. You had things like Lytro, which were, in my opinion, Lytro was released at the wrong time. So it's like, where Lytro was going is like they were probably a tad too early, and it didn't hit the market and didn't have an end user that kind of really understood like what, technically volumetric capture and display technology would be. But now we see more of it today, where it's like maybe Lytro came out today, it would have had a better chance, because people would have understood a little bit better. And now that we're talking, volumetric capture and NeRFs and novel view technology, it might have been better. But yeah, a couple of years ago, I joined Dimension. Dimension did a partnership on the virtual production side, which became DNEG Virtual Production, or DNEG VP, which was a division between DNEG and Dimension that came out to offer virtual production services. So, virtual art department, on-set services, like this whole kind of end-to-end solution. And I got to work on a lot of really cool, R&D projects and, big features. Got to do Pinocchio and a lot of other projects up until recently. And I think in April, I decided to leave because I was looking at where technology was going and where the types of projects I wanted to work on and the types of technology that I wanted to focus on, was kind of changing. And it also was just, I think, a time for me to look at where I was going to focus, my time and my effort for things. And, they have a great team there, and, still talk to a lot of people there, and they're doing some really cool stuff. Like, there's some other projects that I finished up on that'll be coming out, in the not too distant future, and next year too, that I'm really, proud of working on, and definitely the teams that we, got all together, because it is a team effort. You can't, and me as a supervisor, I can't do it without the team, and you get to really rely upon the different technicians and engineers and R&D and support staff and production, managers and producers that you work with. Like, if it's service based versus like your own creative or own internal project, like, with the stuff that you guys do, it's a lot for two people to do. So it's like the benefit of being at bigger studios too at the time is the type of support staff that you can put together to go and do these projects. That's a really big benefit to working at large studios or large vendors is you have availability of technology and people that you may not have as like a smaller boutique. But we're even seeing a lot of that technology be available, just like you guys and your experiments with, with NeRF Studio and Instant NGP and Luma and like all this stuff. Is all the big studios are experimenting with this stuff too, but it's back to time. It's like, how much time do you get to experiment versus like, okay, is this going to work for this feature, or is this custom tool that is being developed for a special use case, for a big tentpole feature film, like being specially built for that show to solve a particular problem, versus like, just grabbing something off the shelf and seeing if it'll work. That happens too, that's the, it's not, I guess I should say it's not a big secret. It is like the big studios use the same tools all of us common folk use too. It's just, there's different things about the pipelines, and there are custom tools, and there are benefits to create efficiencies. And when you're either a single person or at a boutique, or, it's like 5 guys and gals together to make, like a little production company. Sometimes that's the thing that you see is you're learning the efficiencies as you go. And when you're at the bigger studios, sometimes there's a lot of efficiencies in place that streamline the workflow. And you may see like why certain studios go back to certain vendors for repeat business is not only because the teams are really good, but also it's how they work with the clients. It's how they turn over their projects. Are they doing it on time? Are they doing it on budget? Like there's a lot of things, and and it also comes down to like people being friendly with, it's like when a DP works with the same camera team, like there is a shorthand that you create, like you two working together. You kind of know what annoys the both of you. You kind of know like who
How
has
did
the
you know?
stronger.
Wait, how did you know?
Yeah, like who has the stronger skill set. So somebody might be a better modeler, somebody might be better at groom or compositing or lighting, and then you balance each other. That's how teams should work. Is you balance each other out, and that's how as a supervisor, you work with your production managers and like HR teams to kind of staff and build the teams, and you say, look, I've gone into battle many times with this crew. Like I really want, like this TD, and I want this lighter, and I want this compositor, and I want this modeler. And, usually if they're available, it's like building a freelance team. So like when you would get like a bunch of friends together to go, we see a lot of YouTubers do this. Like the guys at Corridor, great example, like a lot of the YouTubers and Mr. Beast, like these are really good examples of people that are not like, traditional studios in the way, but like they're figuring, the guys at So Crispy Media, like these people do really cool things, and they've stepped their level up. Like I remember when Cordo was just Sam and Nico, and it was just like, and those were tied to, it was tied to like Sam and Nico and Freddie W and Brandon, like they were younger, like teenage, YouTubers. I feel like I've watched them grow up to be these like really great artists and build these, kind of self-sufficient studios, and they've been able to hire out their friends and do really cool projects. So yeah, it's like, it's fun to be at the studios, and my journey of working for a lot of different studios, like very, high-end studios, and then boutiques, and even like just like independent ones. It's eye-opening to see how projects are approached, like I've done them where I've, directed them and put the teams together and put the budgets together. And then, when you're at larger studios, there is a different structure to like how teams get set up and how projects get bid and what the breakdowns are and what your role is. At very large feature films, like it's usually multi-vendor. Like it may not be just one person. You may have a single vendor that is like, the overall vendor for visual effects or animation or whatever it is. And then you might have, multi-vendors where different places like Halon and Mold or doing previs and VAD. So it really depends. It's project dependent about how things are set up.
So you touched on one point that I think a lot of people asked us on social media, and I want to point that out because a lot of people actually are really interested in your role, like the VFX and VP supervisor. But I think not a lot of people know what is this role does like every day on a day-to-day basis. Like what is your job every day?
They just think it's the LED volume and that's it. But there's so much more to it.
If it's specific, so it's funny because the role of a virtual production supervisor has been around with different names, and to me, for my role, is because I have a background in cinematography and visual effects. Like I see my role as a virtual production supervisor being a hybrid of both. Because as a virtual production supervisor or a visual effects supervisor, you have to be the hub or the translator, if you will, of a lot of complex technology to creatives. And sometimes the creatives that you work with or the storytellers you work with, they either have not done this before, especially when you're working with like real-time game engines and LED volume and a lot of complex, sometimes custom, technology and workflows. Virtual production in some form or another is not new, like LEDs, LED walls, LED tiles, processors, real-time engines have been around. It's just that the evolution of the use case of these tools has shifted, and it especially shifted a lot during the pandemic. So like virtual production has been around for a while in live visuals, both for like anybody that's been to like, an EDM festival or, Tomorrowland or something crazy like that. It's like, you guys have seen real-time visuals for a long time, whether the real-time through a custom engine, through Touch Designer, through Notch, through, a projection mapping with like Mad Mapper and some of these other tools. You had a lot of creatives and technologists that like were hodgepodging different workflows to go like, it's almost like, hey, we're going to turn this on and see if it works. And sometimes, it would, especially from the live visual side. There's a lot of experimenting too, like visual effects. But the virtual production supervisor thing came about to more prevalence as like, a role, with the bigger push of like using, real-time game engines like Unreal and Unity, and Touch Designer for solving problems that the pandemic kind of hit everybody. Hey, you can't go on location right now, and you can't have a lot of people, and you can. So what tools can we use to solve these problems to still tell stories and create content and do all of this? And we saw this big boom of virtual production. You also just happen to see the growth of real-time engines, like what Epic was doing, like what Unity was doing, like all that. Epic just kind of like took the lane and like a rocket shot off. And, we've seen that, like, it is no secret that, Unreal Engine is the engine of choice for real-time virtual production. There are other tools out there. It's just, they have done a really good job of not only doing the education with like the fellowship and the community and doing things like Unreal Fest and, trying to support creatives and creators with things like mega grants. So they've put a lot back in the community and they've been rewarded for that because of the use cases and also paying attention to, the feature set that does it. But everybody's gonna remember, like, these are game engines built for making games. All of us that are filmmakers and creators, we have been shoehorning a real-time game engine into media workflows. And it's been frustrating over some time because we still have to understand, like, there's development cycles. Like, you can't just go, hey, Epic, Unity, Meta, all you guys, like, we need this feature tomorrow. It's like, it doesn't happen like that. Dev cycles take some cycles to get some things over. But, the virtual production supervisor thing and a lot of these new roles that people still don't know where they sit. For me as a soup, and I kind of go back and forth, is like, sometimes I might be VFX souping a project and sometimes I might be virtual production soup, which is this like hybrid thing. Virtual production teams usually are thought of and sit under visual effects. And everybody knows that, visual effects does not have a union. It's not part of the local 600 with camera and DIT and, 728 and 800 with art directors. And it confuses a lot of people as to like where these roles sit. Like, people go, what's a TD? And then like, oh, is that just the Unreal Engine operator? Is this, so there are really good things that break this down. There's actually something called the Virtual Production Glossary that a lot of people in the industry have been getting feedback, and things that Netflix has been working on as well, that kind of helps break down this information that's out there. Is like, hey, there's this ever-changing thing of like, when The Mandalorian came out, everybody called the Unreal team or the virtual production team the Brain Bar. And it's like, I can't stand that name. It's like, it's an older name that's been around, and it's also equated to a specific set of team that was working on Mando that was tied to the Stagecraft team, which is, Stagecraft is ILM's internal team and process that they use. They had, they use their own renderer and they have their real-time engine. They've used Unreal, they go back and forth, and I'm sure, there's there's different technology approaches to the different teams, but it's been confusing for people to kind of understand and break down, well, where do I fit, or what role can I get on a team? And the best thing I can say is, if you're looking to break into like real-time and virtual production, and you're looking to work with things like LED walls and other things like that, your best thing to do is to focus on what type of role you're looking for. You know, the easiest roles are coming in usually as like a VAD artist, the virtual art department. So if you have an understanding of, you know, Unreal, and you have an understanding of cinematography and photography, because that's a big thing, is I've run across a lot of people that know Unreal, but have never stepped foot on set, have never talked to a client, and don't have like a full understanding of like filmmaking workflows versus game engine workflows. And those are two different things. Each one can help you. There are people that go from filmmaking into the real-time side and vice versa. But usually there's a gap that happens of like understanding these workflows.
How can you get that experience? Because I feel like for people watching, the majority of this audience knows how to probably get Unreal Engine tutorials and content. It's pretty easy to look for that on YouTube. How do you get the filmmaking experience, the studio experience that you just talked about that a lot of people miss out on?
Yeah, there's always the thing of like, you know, the chicken and the egg. Like, how do I get experience to go work on an LED volume, or, you know, run a simulcam session or VCam or anything like that, if I don't, you know, get on a set, or I don't get in that? The one kind of route to do it in YouTube fashion, DIY fashion, is like, you can start off with a webcam, Unreal Engine, a laptop, or like, you know, GoPros are small, you know, cameras that are at least like, you know, 1080. Most cameras are 4K off the bat, or your iPhone. And, you know, you can start playing with, you know, live link tools in Unreal. You can use your iPhone as like a VCam, or, you know, set up take recorder sessions. These are like base workflows that when you see a job position, or when you see like a project, because there's always people that are looking for people like, hey, it might be no pay for education. It might be, you know, hey, we'll pay for your food and we'll pay for your travel. You know, come work on this. Like, and you know, you got to pick and choose what's right for you. Of like, hey, the whole work for free thing is, I think everybody should get paid, even if it's like a, you know, PA route. But sometimes I've done it in my career where you go and do things for free to learn.
Just to learn.
You know,
just to learn.
To learn. Like, be on a fly on the wall. It's like, you know, somebody had said, you know, even today, if somebody said, hey, you know, Roger Deakins is shooting this thing with Spielberg, and it's like, you're not going to get paid. And it'd be like, I don't care. Hands down.
I don't care.
I'll be there.
I would go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
I totally agree with that.
The experience is priceless. Like, you cannot put price on that experience.
Especially if you're starting out, if you're hungry, you should, like you said, yes, you should get paid. But if you're really hungry, you shouldn't give a damn. Like, just go and learn if you get the chance to do so.
And the thing is like, you learn a lesson. And whether it winds up no good and the project is disorganized or whatever it is, like, you're still going to learn. You're going to learn like, hey, maybe I should have checked in with the producer and asked this. Or if it's an independent thing and it's just a couple people, maybe you'd be like, oh, I saw that, you know, we didn't approach this, or we did this right. And every time you go into these projects, it'll be a learning lesson. But within these roles that people are trying to figure out where they would sit, because it's a really exciting time with all this technology. It's like you have a lot of experimenting that's coming into working with, you know, LED walls and real-time game engines. Is like, that's not the only thing virtual production is. Virtual production is a blanket term for a lot of different technology and creative approaches to do that. So virtual production is not solely just LED walls. Virtual
Thank you
production
for saying that. Thank you for
covers a
saying
lot
that.
of different things.
Yeah, this is something that I think I need to put it on social media. I think a lot of people make that mistake.
Yeah.
Virtual production is not only that big LED wall screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can still do it. Look, the whole thing of like, LED walls kill green screen and blue screen. It's like, no, the thing that's going to kill green screen and blue screen is going to be AI and machine learning. And
Yeah.
it's not going to happen overnight. Yeah, this is still evolutionary stuff. Like to say like any one piece of technology is going to kill a job or kill a technique or a workflow process, it's a lot of hype.
Yeah.
I do hope some of these things get displaced because they're inefficient. So in workflows, nobody wants to sit there and roto. And nobody wants to sit there and just sit there and key and comp and spill suppress and edge blend and feather. And like, these are menial, tedious tasks that with technology can speed you up. Because if you're a compositor or an editor or you're making creative decisions that's going to enhance a look of a frame, because if we just lock it down to a frame and you're going to pause your favorite film on like any hero segment, it's like the hidden thing that happens from like editorial, VFX, animation, sound, production team is like, it's always the thing of like, if you pause it on a frame, that frame should stand alone, good or bad. Hopefully you don't pause it on like, a non-iframe and you've got all this motion blur, but there's a book out there that is kind of old that a buddy Stu Maschwitz used to share when he had his guerrilla filmmaking book, but it was like every frame is a Rembrandt, and it relates to filmmaking and the creative process, and it stands true. It's like there are people that will methodically kind of like nitpick and you'd want to get some CG soups and VFX soups that'll just, or clients that'll pixel peep, they'll be over the shoulder and be like, move that pixel 3 up to the right. And it's like, it happens. But yeah, these evolutionary roles, and how people get into this is like, you honestly can experiment at home, at school, at home, whatever it is. There's going to be a little bit of this. You need a couple things in place to do it, but Unreal Engine is free. If you already have a camera, and a laptop, you're like 3/4 of the way there, and it's going to be about educating yourself to do this, because there's not every workflow documented on the Unreal side of things. Like, all of us that are, on the bleeding edge are always breaking things and going back to the companies as early adopters and just saying like, hey, this works, this doesn't work. And a lot of people in the community too, like on Reddit, on YouTube, on all the social media platforms, like it's just a matter of experimenting. So yes, you do need time on set, especially on the high-end stuff, because it is virtual production as a whole with LED walls is a mixture of production first. It is still your production teams, your production designer, your DP, your DIT, your ADs, your sound teams, like your crane ops, like your key grips, your gaffers, like it's still production. That's why it's called virtual production. It's still traditional production. You add the layer of these technologies and engineering, because with LED walls, you have the physical build of the walls, which also need to be safely done so the wall doesn't fall over, rip scaffolding down. So you need really good grips and gaffer to make sure the lighting and the structure is safe. These walls are designed. So there's, structural engineering that goes into it. There is CAD design. There is a method to the madness of why the shapes are different of the LED volumes. A lot of times we've seen a lot of demos that were people that have like, cheaper LED walls be like flat. It's because this stuff is really expensive still. You're talking about a per tile cost You're talking about the power consumption. You need a lot of power to power all of these large volumes. You need the processing power to break down. And you guys know this well, even running a beefy computer to, render to an LED display, like a big 65-inch OLED that you have, sometimes you got to set up a pretty beefy system to run an end display setup. That exponentially grows when you're doing it to like big Christie projectors or, 16K by 6K LED volumes on a pixel count. So that barrier that you guys talk about, and then I think a lot of the questions that come in of like, how do I break into this, or like, what role would I fit into? It's a matter of the roles are kind of defined in that, if you have a strong background in modeling and a game engine, and building assets and kit bashing things together, it's like, well, maybe your entry into a virtual production team or real-time team might be through like as an asset builder on a virtual art department team. Or you could be doing previs and tech biz where, you're using the engines instead of building all this in, Maya, Max, Cinema 4D. But if you have a strong background in any of those traditional DCCs, you can take a lot of that and bring it over into that, just like you could if you were coming from traditional filmmaking. If you're coming from a cinematography and photography background, you're going to be at an advantage coming into Unreal Engine because you're going to know shot composition, you're going to know lensing, you're going to know different, sensor and film backs. Hopefully you have that understanding that you can take that production learning and bring it in. And then the understanding of the game engine will just come as you spend more time in it. But you have to spend quite a bit of time in the game engines because things change quickly. And, I'm not just talking about buttons moving, I'm talking about workflows. And that's a really big thing, is like people getting into or wanting to get into virtual production in real time is you have to stay on top of kind of evolutionary steps in that the technology is changing fast. We've seen this a lot really quick with generative AI and other tools that are coming into this world. And, that's kind of one of the best tips is just like, even if you may not be in the engine or in that tool or in Luma or in Wonder Dynamics or whatever it is, at least if you play around and understand the workflows, you would understand if that platform or that particular tool is right for you and where you want to go. Otherwise, like you might be wasting your time and go, hey, I'm not doing character IK stuff or, automatic rotoscoping. Like maybe I don't need to use Wonder Dynamics now. Or maybe, I need to focus here, especially if you want like a career trajectory.
Right. You brought up so many important points, and I want to touch on most of them with Farhad. One of the things that I want to talk about is just hiring, especially because you mentioned so many different roles. And I believe a lot of people like ourselves who've never been on these giant sets, I don't know which role I fit in. And you said that's a common issue a lot of people have. So if I don't know, and if I don't know cinematography, I might know a little bit of Unreal Engine. Would you say the right thing for me to do is go ahead and hone my skills in modeling, in sculpting, in texturing, in camera work, just to know the basics, and then also at the same time hone my skills in cinematography and film, maybe read a couple of books, learn more about color theory and stuff like that. And then do you recommend me going deep into one thing? For example, let's say in-camera visual effects. We know that you took I believe the fellowship or the course from Unreal Engine to do that. Do you recommend like going deep into one thing? Would that get you hired easily? Is that what you guys look for when you're looking for somebody new? Let's say there's 10 people. How do you guys pick from all these people to add to your team?
That's when you're building a team for a project, as a supervisor, if you're production side, meaning working for the studio versus working for the vendor, sometimes teams get built for a production and they work with the vendors, or sometimes, the vendor will be handling a lion's share of the type of work, and they may already have internal teams and they'll backfill with freelancers. So, when you're say like a CG soup or a build supervisor, you're looking for people on your team that are strong at the particular needs of that show. So if you know that you're going to be doing a lot of photoreal modeling, you're going to be looking at people that are really good at, like things like Substance Painter and ZBrush and things of that way. If you're doing things that are very character driven and it's a mix of like a hybrid live action or animation or just animation, you're going to be looking for people that are, really good at modeling, texturing, animation, because you need to round out a team. If you're a specific individual that's more of like a generalist and you're like, okay, I know Blender, I know Maya, I know, a little bit of this because it's a hard part tool. There's so many different tools to learn and you go, well, do I just focus on, being like the best ZBrush artist?
Yeah.
You'll find your job if like you do pick a specific thing. Specialists are still very much in demand, in terms of like, if you were to go down a route and go, you know what, I'm just going to focus on animation and I'm really good at rigging a model and being able to animate it. And then it goes into the different departments when you're at a much larger studio versus like an individual who's like, you know what, this is my project. I've got a model, I've got to texture it. I've got to do everything for it. And you become like this self-inflicted generalist that has to do it because nobody else is on your team. Versus a studio where you may model and rig a character, and then you may hand it off, and it may go to the paint team, and then it goes to the lighting team, and it steps through that. There's different categories and efficiencies. I would say if you were having a base level generalist skill set right now, is by all means, I would say to take the time to learn about the other departments you may work with or other roles. I did the same thing. It's like when I was on set, I'd always want to know, like when early on, so I would go around, if you have the time, you go around, like introduce yourself and go like, oh, what is it that you do? And, you try to get an understanding and appreciation, because making a movie or making a project, usually if it's not your individual thing, it's like, it's a total team effort, and you're either waiting for other departments to do their bit and then you do yours, or it's like all in at one time. So it's never a bad thing to learn more about cinematography and photography. The best ways you can do that is go out and shoot your own stuff, hands down. That's like one of the best advice you could give somebody is like, if you're a modeler, go out there and learn about stop motion. If you're learning about modeling and animation, learn about, go take a life drawing class. If you want to learn about color theory, don't just read the books, go to museums, paint, mix colors, do all this stuff to get the understanding. If you're wanting to know more about cinematography and photography in that way, is there are so many resources, but other than shooting your own stuff, is watch the greats, pick one DP, pick a Roger Deakins, pick a Greg Frazier, especially for VP.
Are those are those the ones that you looked up to and you checked out?
There's so many. I mean, like there's probably like a lot of unknowns that if I said their names, people wouldn't know too. But like, there's early DPs and cinematographers that you would look up to. But I bring up Roger because he's, ever since he launched his website and he had his forums, like, him and a couple ASC and BSC DPs, like at the highest end that have shot all of our favorite films. There's been a bunch of them through like the ASC and through, other global unions and committees that they give back. And, during the pandemic, Roger and his wife, started the podcast. And the podcast was like the who's who of DPs and production designers and visual effects supervisor. And if you go to Roger's website, like he answers tons of questions on his forum. He's, it's been around for years. There's a lot of other art directors and DPs and VFX soups that give back in terms of like trying to educate. I try to do the same thing as much as I can when I go to like, do talks at Unreal Fest or, do things like this, is to share like where resources are. And there's a lot of resources out today. There's so many good YouTube channels that even I follow. The things that you guys are doing for trying to get education out there is really cool, because people are looking to get into whatever it is. And you may go, hey, maybe I come in through virtual art department, but then somebody at the team said, hey, does anybody know anything about NeRF? And it just so happens that person was experimenting with Luma AI and, NeRF Studio and Instant NGP and all this. And then who knows where that could take you in your career. So that's why I say experimenting is really important to get to these roles and how to build these teams. It's like, you have to be a chameleon. It's like I don't want to say you have to learn everything, because even for me, it's impossible. Anybody that tells you they're an expert in Unreal Engine, I kind of call BS on, because the engine or
100%.
engines are there's so many facets of what you can do, especially with Unreal, is that, and you talk to the guys and gals at Epic and they'll even tell you the same thing. It's like,
even they themselves probably don't know the whole software.
Oh,
like
there's
one
no
department
single person
can know.
that can know everything.
It's use cases. It's use cases. Yeah. It's like you can look on, and I work with Epic a lot, and they've been really great. And there's stuff that they come across that it's just like, oh, somebody did this approach, or somebody did this with metahumans, or somebody did this with volumetric data and NeRFs, and it sparks something. So that's what's cool, and why I say experimenting, because you never know the little project that you do, and that's the thing. If you do it, put it out there, share it, and just once it's out there, it's out there. It's no longer yours. It becomes the world. So you never know who's going to come across it. It's like back to the kid who got to do the animation stuff for Spider-Verse, is like, he put that out there. Like, did he ever think that the directors from Spider-Verse were going to call him to do that? Like, I don't think the kid's passion was like, I'm going to do this just to get a gig, and be animating Spider-Verse. Like, there's an interview with him out there online that is just like, he didn't expect it. Like, he was just a kid having fun, doing what he did. But now I got to think, because I don't know him personally, but I got to think, like, he has a fire lit under him now, that now he has this like passion, and hopefully it doesn't go stale of working in the industry, because the industry sometimes can be down on you. But that's what's cool about this stuff, of like all this new tech and all of the working with cool people, is what keeps me going. Is like, there's always a new challenge. There's always like new creatives to work with. There's new titles. I mean, like, I'm like all the stuff coming out. There's a lot of cool films and stuff coming out, but I'm like really excited to see and to hear about Gareth Edwards' new project, the creator. And I know a lot of people that worked on it, and I can't wait until it's out, because I want to pick their brains apart about the creative approach, the technical approach. Like, so I get really psyched and, geek out on friends' projects, or like, people I look up to, or contemporaries, that are just like, oh, I dissect every BTS that comes out from, like, it doesn't matter if it's a traditional shot project or it's like a TV show or a commercial. Like, I just look at it and I wonder, like, oh, how did they do that? And then, it's cool that social media lets everybody share BTS and approaches, and they go, that's how you can understand and go like, oh, okay, I see this person was like the VP soup on this project. And, when I do the BTSs or the EPKs, it's like, I get to break down, some of the approaches and how we did stuff and what the team did on things. So that's really cool, because you never know who's going to watch these and get inspired to be like, oh, okay, like, I see what they did, and that person has this title. Like, maybe that's what I'm going to, either aspire to go for in a career, or to go, oh, that was really cool. Well, why don't I just get 5 friends together and we can do this ourselves? Which you can.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the BTS thing is very important. You learn a lot from BTS, and that can be an educational pathway for itself. Like you just watch BTS, you see how people are doing it, you get to know what you need to do yourself. But there was something that Jim mentioned in the beginning, that as his role as a supervisor, he's the hub that translates the latest technology for the creatives.
Yeah.
One question that I always had was, how hard is it to convince the creatives with the ideas that you have? Because when I look at your Twitter, it's like 5 years ahead of time. You know, you are experimenting with things that are really experimental. I would call them high risk for a big production. I don't know how much of those you take to the studios, or even you bring up the idea and explain it, and how much of the actors, the producer, the directors are accepting these ideas.
And I want to add weight to that question just to make it harder for you.
Sure.
Just trying to understand VP's role, the virtual producer's role a little bit more, and supervisors. Is that essentially what you do mostly on a day-to-day basis? Look for new technologies and find ways to implement them to improve the workflow. And then when those workflows have problems, you're the guy who has to fix it. You have to be the one who goes in.
Jim said
you're like the firefighter. Yeah. So I just want to add that at the end as well.
Sometimes it does get put on my shoulders, as working with the production teams, but it's kind of like a multifaceted answer is, yes, I'm always looking at what's next. And it's usually based off of either a current problem that still hasn't been solved in the industry or industries, looking at where those gaps are and where those inefficiencies are, to be like, I knew we did this on this film and it took us like a year ahead of time to develop a tool just for that. Does that gap, need to be filled either just for the project, or is this something like the industry needs, or, as, visual effects and filmmaking and animation? And sometimes the projects have specific needs that say this technology doesn't exist. Do we have R&D time to develop something, or does this need to be created on the fly? And it is a risk. It's a risk for the studios. It's a risk for the directors. It's a risk for, all the supervisors. And it really depends on, like, if you're talking about a big, hundreds of millions of dollars, like, feature film, there are calculated risks. And, it depends on the studios and the directors and the team you're working with, and the faith that they would put in you, either as a team, if you're at a vendor, or if you're hired as a virtual production super or a visual effects supervisor. Is you do get interviewed. If you're trying to go with the team, they go through and say, is this team or is this person a right fit for this production? It may be because of you've worked with those teams before, or they've, word of mouth, you have a reputation in the industry for being able to solve problems, and you're good with working with people. I've had it happen a couple times with a good friend who is, a contemporary and or a mentor, who is, a top tier visual effects supervisor, my friend Kevin Bailey. I'd say a perfect example is, like, I've worked on, 2 projects with Kevin kind of back to back, and Bob Zemeckis and Don Burgess, the DP. And there's been a couple times where Kevin's taken the risk to look at new technology and kind of put the onus on, myself and wider teams to say, hey, here's an opportunity. What solutions are out there? Or he may have a solution and an approach, and kind of go, well, let's figure this out and see if this will work for this particular show. We did that heavily for Pinocchio. And we used new camera tracking systems that had never been used before in a different type of technology. And sometimes things worked and sometimes they failed. And they're really good learning lessons to see, not only for us as a team, or not only for me as a super in production, is sometimes you get to work with really adventurous and risk-taking directors and cinematographers and other, production designers that, really want to push the boundary, because all this tech is supposed to be in service of the story. It's supposed to enhance it. Like they always say, like editorial and visual effects and all this is supposed to be the invisible art. You guys, the way we do things, and this could be, from studio feature films down to like even for YouTube, is like the invisible art is, people not being able to see your work because you don't want your work to distract and pull somebody out of the story. And the best way, when we were just talking about people and experimenting with different roles, is like do little shorts yourself. And like, these little short experiments and R&D stuff, you heavily watch it on, things like Avatar with Cameron. If you look at the amount of R&D and experimenting that go into things like Avatar and things like both Pinocchios, I would say Bob Zemeckis' Pinocchio and Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Well, both our Pinocchios came out at the same time. And Guillermo's being stop motion and, done here in Portland with amazing stop motion and technology teams. And then the totally live action CG mix that we did on Pinocchio is two faithful stories, two different approaches, two visual approaches that came out differently. And both great films, whether the critics like one or the other, it doesn't matter. Like, Pinocchio for me was like another way to push the level. And I'm like, I know myself and Kevin and John and Bob and everybody on the teams are like really proud of what the teams were able to do on Pinocchio because we pushed new ground. And then the feature that I just finished with them that's still being worked on is another film that needed quite a bit of new approaches to achieve the visual that Bob and the team had envisioned. And you need people like that are going to push you. You need like the Kevins and the Bobs and the Dons and all those teams back there to go, is this possible? And the cool thing about people like that is, they're putting a risk into you, but they're putting risks into the teams. And like I say, when you're dealing with very large feature films, there's calculated risks. So there's sometimes only so much you can go to, but then you need people and teams to push into like what Avatar had done, never been done, and what the guys and gals early on with James Cameron and Glenderry and a lot of the like early like technoprops team of like building HMCs and different ways of doing mocap and VCam and simulcam. It's like we're all benefiting from that because it's all trickled down now into the different tools or approaches. Is like, you could do VCam at home with your iPhone, it's like, it's really cool to see that, but you do need those people to push you in those directions to be like, this has never been done before. We're going to trust you with this, or we're going to approach this as a team. And none of us have ever done it before, but here's the risk. And it's usually worth it, because if it fails, you're learning. And if it goes off really well, you're learning, and you sometimes reap the benefits that your project is like well loved. It's not about like, oh yeah, back end would be like, oh, does the film or does the project make money? Yes, that's a good thing too, because you need to recoup and, get proven to be like, hey, this was successful. So on the next one, we get to take an even greater risk with a bigger budget. Sometimes not, it's like sometimes your budgets are not, they may be really big on one and then they may not be as big as the next one. So it really depends.
I'm curious, sorry, Faraz, like how much of this knowledge is being shared in the industry? Like now what you mentioned about Avatar, of course we watched the BTS, but like is
gatekeeping, is that
is gatekeeping a thing for all this knowledge?
You know what? I hate gatekeeping because I think it's complete BS. Because look, and one thing I went through it myself. Like people, when I was coming up, it's job security,
Yeah.
like, and it might be, it might be some IP that somebody's protecting, which is great. But I do say, unless you're writing custom tools, there's usually an approach to figure out how to do it off the shelf. There are definitely studios and vendors and technology companies that exist because they are doing something that nobody does. They have spent millions or hundreds of millions, at times to do, like, in ILM is a perfect example. They have proprietary tools. They have the teams and the work coming in as well to kind of build a cycle of like constantly evolving, technology. Hell yeah, there's gatekeeping, and and sometimes it's justified. I get it. It's like, we had it at Dimension, we had it at DNEG, other studios we were at, we had it. I mean, we had it at GoPro. Like, there's custom things that give you the edge above others that either get you hired or get you to work on that next project or get you to, create that next evolutionary product. So yeah, there is that. But from my stance is, a lot of these tools are available to everybody. They're accessible by renting it, by borrowing it, by buying it. So it's pretty hard to say that, like, Pandora's box was opened a while ago. We saw it with all these evolutionary steps in there, and like we've definitely been seeing it in the past couple of years with AI and machine learning too. Is like a lot of these things are leveling the field, in terms of accessibility. The whole kind of legality behind a lot of the new tools that are coming out, that's still something that needs to be worked out. I do feel like, artists should be paid their worth. If a lot of these platforms are scraping data and getting that, like, they should credit and pay the artists and where that data is coming from. And it gets into a much bigger conversation that could be its own podcast that I won't dive into. But, yes, I mean, I've been using AI and machine learning for a while, and especially with generative AI, there are approaches to go about it in a legal and ethical way. I will leave it open-ended that a lot of the platforms in question that we see on the conversations on Twitter and everywhere else is, how those different platforms may be doing unethical things that's still remain to be seen. Like that will flesh itself out. Hopefully it doesn't get overregulated that it stifles innovation, but we'll see, because, that does worry me a little bit when people that don't understand technology make laws about things they don't understand. It doesn't always benefit everybody, but we'll see. It's there. I'm kind of in my stance with, like, all these new tools and the approaches and how we use them at different studios is like, I'm 100% for them. They help speed up, and the way that I use, like, AI and generative and machine learning today is really looking at it from how can you get from what's up in here out visually quicker, and usually
And better.
yeah. I mean, it does. Like, sometimes the benefit of, sitting there and messing with something good or bad, like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or ControlNet or EBSynth, or, I can rifle off 30 more different platforms and tools that have been around for a while now. For me individually, like, it helps me get iterative ideas out there quicker, and right now I mainly use different tools for, pre-vising things or tech vising things, and going in there and kit bashing things and going like, hey, is this the right path, or is this the right approach? Is this a good creative look? Like, does this technology, make things more efficient for me? And that's like how I look at, hey, can I use this for this next project? Or I may see down the road, like, hey, this is the infancy of this. In like 18 months, it's going to be here. In 2 years, and then in 5 years, I know it's going to be here. So maybe I go in the long haul on some type of technology or some type of approach and be like, I see the breadcrumbs, like what you were saying before of like seeing some of my work on like Twitter and social media platforms. It's like looking for those breadcrumbs, and that's one thing that I think I've been pretty good at in my career is looking at like what's the next thing coming, or like having a little bit of an intuition into, hey, if this thing married with this thing and we used it for this, like nobody's ever done this before, or it's going to, accelerate our workflow. It's going to save, money in post-production, something like that. And that when you can show that to a studio or a filmmaker or a showrunner or a producer, that's where, a proof of concept becomes something that goes like, okay, that gets the stamp of approval. We're going to take the risk on this now to use it for this project. And then we're going to put it on your shoulders and the team's shoulders to like prove this out. So
Okay,
that's
Jim,
that risk.
speaking of exactly what you just mentioned, the next breadcrumb, NeRF. When are we going to see the stamp of approval on NeRFs? What are your thoughts on NeRFs, and who do you think is doing it the best way? Of course, we have Luma AI, we have the NVIDIA's own, we have Instant NGP, we have Neura Angelo, which is like also another model that is being developed, which looks even
NVIDIA's
better.
new tool.
So give us everything you know about what's happening with NeRFs, because we experimented with it, but of course it's
We
just for
love it, and
YouTube.
we just don't know when it can be used. And I was thinking that it can start from music videos or short film. Like it can.
People are
have a
using it right
place.
now. It's
Oh, is
showing
it?
up in commercials. Yeah, we're seeing. I mean, look, the way that what I really liked about doing like music videos and commercials early on was like a lot. Like you had a shorter round and quicker experimentation time with like shorter form projects versus like if you work on features, sometimes you can work on features for a year and sometimes a couple of years if it's an avatar. But what's cool about that is we've started to see the way that content creators, meaning it doesn't matter if you're an individual influencer or you're like these boutique influence content creation companies or like, a Corridor or So Crispy or any of those, is all of the different brands are paying attention to the social media trends. And you're seeing the technology become easier and more accessible to individual artists, like people like yourselves. Was it like Karen Chang and like all these people experimenting it? And, they may partner up with a friend who's like, somebody who's their shooter and editor, and they go, oh, I saw this thing and I came across, this Bad Decisions YouTube video that was like showing NeRFs and it looked really easy, and they did one with this, with this tool called Luma AI, and they go in and they start experimenting, and then they put out the experiment, and then the brand sees their video and they go like, hey, I want you to do that for us in this style for us. So you're starting to see things like NeRFs, and I'll get to where they're at in a second, but you're starting to see these novel view approaches to technology with NeRFs and different machine learning and computer vision tools hit this good enough quality level right now where my feeling today on NeRFs and generative AI for things that I do every day for like to hold up on a feature film, for the big screen and for large format LED and all of that is it's still a work in progress. The fidelity and the control that you would want individual over certain parameters, whether it be from the camera or from the renderer or from the materials and the texture and the quality level is getting better day by day. And there are certain use cases where I could say, hey, NeRFs rendered out of this platform can't hold up on an LED volume. It's just not there from a collective level. If you're talking about like a little 30 by 30 LED volume, hey, the NeRF out of Luma or Instant NGP or NeRF Studio might hold up on a much smaller scale, and you could use a NeRF as a background, as like for image based lighting, if you're using an LED volume as like more of a translate than you are for in-camera visual effects. But it's accelerating so fast. So I think there's use cases of NeRFs today that could totally fit, like the way you guys are using them for both the educational and the experimenting for YouTube and other platforms is good experimentation, because it's like, we could be having the same conversation right after SIGGRAPH, and all the papers come out in SIGGRAPH, and all the new like update, some new updates drop right after SIGGRAPH. A lot of computer vision and technology things get dropped at SIGGRAPH, and for a lot of people that don't pay attention to computer animation and computer generated content trade shows, SIGGRAPH, it would be like your like anime show for people that are super into anime, like for CG and visual effects and animation, like and future technology. SIGGRAPH is like something to pay attention to. And the cool thing is it's back in LA this year. So
that's not cool, man. That's not cool, man. He was in Vancouver last time.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's cool? That ain't cool at all.
Well, Vancouver's fun. I mean, I was up there at SIGGRAPH for Vancouver, and I definitely love taking trips up to Vancouver. But yeah, I think the state of NeRFs, and like we were saying with the tools from Luma, and I've talked to the Luma team, and they're creating a really great tool, especially like I say, the most advanced camera that's out there is still an iPhone, and
100%.
and this is no knock to any RE Mini LF or any Red Raptor or Komodo or Sony Venice or A7S or any of that stuff. But having seen where pre-iPhone to like what an iPhone can do today, especially for a content creator who happens to do visual effects, is like it's the perfect scouting phone. If you have something like Luma and Polycam and Scaniverse and like all these other tools out there, it's like you can show up to a place and get a base level scan, come back, bring it into Maya, Unreal Engine, Cinema 4D, Blender, whatever it is, and get it to a level that it takes an evolutionary step in terms of that. But it's super quick to iterate based off an iPhone, an iPad, or mobile devices as a whole. And NeRFs are just this newer approach to doing novel view synthesis of pixels, like to be able to create from a 2D flat image, depth and data, because we do have, depth cameras on a lot of our devices. Normally how we would have to do that is we would have to, rent or have a very expensive LiDAR scanner on set and shooting HDRIs and using a lot of photogrammetry approaches, which are still relevant and will be for quite a while, because there is a detail level that you get from traditional photogrammetry and LiDAR scanning that you can't get from the phone today. So you're using these mixtures of technologies for, whatever that approach is. And NeRFs and novel view approaches to, filling in missing information like depth data, pixel data, texture data, materials, like all of that is really interesting to see how fast it's moving. Because if you look at the NVIDIA projects, you look at Google, you look at the stuff that Apple's doing, it's really interesting if you look at the breadcrumbs too in Apple, especially with things like Vision Pro coming next year. If you just look at that, like camera kit and AR kit within Apple, there's some really cool things in there that, like, if you just get a developer account and you start messing with things, like you've got some pretty robust virtual production tools right in there. And you can create, like you can probably do some really cool virtual production tool, create it and pop it up on the marketplace. So NeRF wise, I think we're in a state where they're at a level of good enough for certain types of workflows, especially if it's for, things like commercials or brand videos or YouTube and educational. I think the best way to equate them is like I've said they're kind of at their Instagram filter stage right now,
Yeah.
where they have a ceiling to them, but the ceiling keeps going up because the technology is changing fast from like all these different platforms that are out there and projects, and then new research papers keep coming out. So if you're like, hey, well, if I shoot NeRF as a background and I have that, can I use that for an LED stage? If I shoot a NeRF and render it out as a background, but then I shoot markerless mocap with like Move AI or another set of tools, can I then bring a rigged character into that NeRF background? Yes, you can do that today. Like people do it all the time, and it'll just keep getting better and better and better. So I think NeRFs are in this evolutionary stage, and I think like we have the same conversation post SIGGRAPH and like, say January of next year, we're going to be in a totally different place.
We should have that conversation, and I'm looking forward to that. We're going to clip this moment in the next podcast. Okay, a couple of questions come to mind. First question, have you seen anybody use an iPhone in for feature films or shows to, not even for the final product, but to, let's say, scan something for a scouting location or anything? Have you seen people already start using, or maybe even yourself, start using all these, tools that are available to the entire world, like an iPhone, to help their production?
I do it all the time. I've been using an iPhone and iPads, and there was this nice tool and system called Project Tangle at Google back in the day, which was killed. It was great. It was a great potential tool that I wish they hadn't killed. But yeah, hands down. Like if you were to say like, hey, what's in your supervisor kit that's always there, and it's usually like an iPhone and an iPad. To capture, because you can use tools like Luma AI, you can use tools like Polycam, you can use reality capture now that there is an iPhone based capture to that, and be really quick to like get it down and dirty scan and bring it into Unreal Engine, and it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Usually what we do is we go back and, LiDAR it with like like an RTC 360 or, some other type of like higher end LiDAR scanner for like sets and locations. But you'd be surprised like the quality level that you can reach today. And that just gets you faster. So like I've worked with other soups and other production designers who have gone and like either I've shown them this tool or they use it themselves. And it becomes this collaborative thing where it's just like, hey, let me just export out this, this OBJ or this FBX, and I'll send it over to you. And it's, oh, cool. Let me bring this into Unreal or into Blender or DCC package, and you just start iterating really quick back and forth. So it's really good for collaboration and speed.
Wow. And I think that the distance between using very high tech devices in high production value and using boutique studio and iPhone is really getting smaller. And I want to talk about democratization of tools and technologies that we have now. The softwares that you mentioned, most of them have free accounts. You can just get started on them for free. Yeah. Polycam, Luma, Unreal Engine is free, Blender is free.
Yeah, and now we have MetaHuman Animator, which just recently got announced. And
this is crazy. Like previously, to get a good facial motion capture, of course there was LiveLink, but you had to have an HMC.
Yeah, LiveLink is like it's using just the basic blend shapes, right, of ARKit, and so the movements and the range of motion is very limited. And the other alternatives were just expensive gear that as a solo artist or a creator who's just starting out and you're excited about creating your short film, and boom, you have the uncanny valley of having a shitty facial animation because you just can't get around that. And now you have MetaHuman Animator, which is like, dude, it's freaking crazy. Okay, it's crazy for us, but have you also had the same reaction towards MetaHuman Animator when you saw it? Because you were
like, I've seen this before.
Oh, no. The first time I saw and sometimes seeing things a little bit earlier, working with Epic for a while, I was like,
Oh, so you saw it earlier than when they announced it? Okay,
maybe. I'm not breaking any ideas.
We need to create a private WhatsApp group with Jim just for the sake of getting news early on, getting alpha.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, that's the thing sometimes is you know, I've over my career too, I've been lucky enough to kind of beta test and give feedback to a lot of different software and hardware companies. And, you know, that, you know, seeing some of those either sneak peek or getting to test things to give feedback is really cool because you can help shape like what the next evolution of some of these tools are. From I remember sitting in the crowd the first time I saw the public Fortnite trailer
Yeah.
at an Epic special event, and I'm just like, "Whoa, this is awesome!" Like the game engine company, because this is, you know, there obviously we had known that, like, you know, Epic was making games, you know, their own games too, you know, from Unreal side, Unreal Tournament, but it's like, oh well, you know, here's this new game, and it was created all with this tool, you know, and over the time, the one I would say the one great thing about, you know, working or seeing those breadcrumbs, like I was saying earlier, was like I did a got invited onto a project with Epic years back, and you know, I got introduced to a lot of the team, and got to work with Kim Labrie at Epic, and you know, looking at how we were using the tool for this one project that was in collaboration with the Mill and Epic for some new tools that were going to, you know, be announced in Unreal Engine. You know, this is back in like end of 2015, 2016, and like for me working on that project, I'm like, okay, this is connecting the dots for me. Like I can be this much faster for this, and you know, it was bringing in, you know, this one happened to be for using at that time what was known as the Mills Blackbird, which was supposed to be this tool, this hybrid physical car that was going to change like you know, car commercials for a while, and it was a really awesome project, and you know, it's still up on Epic's site, and there's this whole BTS of the project that kind of talks about what we did. But it was that early thing that connected the dots for me for like what Unreal Engine was going to be for me as like a you know, as like a visual effects artist and a DP and a storyteller. It's just like, oh, I can get my ideas myself out faster, and if I'm working on projects with other people, I can. And then as I dove deeper into the kind of Epic land, if you will, in looking at their acquisitions over time, you know, with cubic motion and three lateral and so many of these other tools in gaming. So you think of like some things in gaming, well, how would that would apply to filmmaking? It's like, well, you're getting the benefit of these tools to be able to, you know, iterate your ideas faster. And, you know, when it came to first seeing like the first tease of something like MetaHuman, with MetaHuman, you know, character creator, and then you've got, you know, MetaHuman animator, and you're looking at like these are all the tools that were part of cubic motion and three lateral and other kind of science experiments internally at Epic, and just go, whoa, this is like going to be available to all of us. You know, it's like this isn't locked up at like Weta and ILM and all. It's like, I'm sure there's influence that have come from, you know,
Yes. Yeah.
all of them, you know, and just seeing where the trajectory. And so if you look at it too, you can't not look at, you know, Kim and the team that he and others at Epic have brought in. But it's like, you know, Kim was a visual effects supervisor for The Matrix and a lot of other amazing projects. And
Well, I didn't
he
know
and the
that. That's
teams,
crazy.
yeah. Well, it's funny enough. Kim is in the last Matrix too. Like he actually makes a cameo with some other,
Oh,
wow.
some other
really?
the other. Yeah, yeah. I won't spoil it for anybody that hasn't seen it, but Kim and some of the other, you know, visual effects team make a little cameo in the most recent Matrix. It's like by the elevator scene, kind of like earlier on. But yeah, so you know, if you look at the way that specifically Epic, with MetaHuman Animator and a lot of the other tools around VP and animation, like you've got a game engine that has evolved And it doesn't solve every problem for filmmaking and all this, because it's still a game engine that is now augmenting to serve the needs of all of us coming from content creation and filmmaking, coming into a game engine and going like, hey, we need these tools, and I want it to act like this, and it would be great to do this. So, you know, it's having that appreciation for like development too, to understand like they you know, there is a finite amount of team, even though Epic is doing really well, you know, to be able to build everything that everybody wants. But when you look at, you know, the changes from Unreal Engine 4 to 5, it was like night and day, you know, especially as a whole, not just for virtual production, but just as a whole. And then we look at, you know, we're about to come up on, you know, Unreal Engine 5.3 roadmap publicly released. And there's, you know, there's always the roadmap and keeping, you know, an eye on the roadmap board and the Trello boards and like what the GitHub releases are, because you can find little gems in there and be like, oh, here's this thing. So you've got to compile a build, but still you get to poke around in the engine early. But yeah, MetaHuman as a whole has been a really awesome tool that has been able to democratize what people can do to make, you know, a digital twin or digital human. And normally how we would do it, like how we were doing it at Dimension and DNEG, and even previous to that, was you normally had to go in, you had to have a CyberScan rig, you know, you had to build one, you know, off of like hundreds of cameras that are all synced, and it's a lot of data. And then you've got to go through and you've got to rebuild it, retopo it, skin it, IK rig it. Like it was a lot of work. And tools like that, because I do have to give credit to Unity with, you know, with the Ziva tools that they acquired and some of the Weta tools that they have there. There's some really cool things on that side that Unity has been doing with the Ziva Dynamics team. But I would say like Epic hands down has just made it much easier to do digital humans and rig them and bring them into a scene and you know, use things like, you know, all the kit bash and Quixel tools and reality capture tools. And my thing is like, people are like, oh, you know, I don't even think it's a whole thing of like Epic versus Unity. They're just different tools. You know, it's a different paintbrush in which way I would approach, you know, certain things. If I was doing like mobile AR gaming, I'd go, okay, maybe that's a Unity project. If I was building certain things or trying to solve certain problems,
even Vision Pro right now, Unity seems to be the better option for Vision Pro. People who want to develop for that, mainly because Apple is partnering with them, but I believe even with Unreal, you can eventually create projects.
Yeah, there's been Vision Pro. There's been a Vision Pro workflow. Like their documentation from the Unreal side of things is there too. I don't think that it's going to be a one horse race in terms of a game engine availability. I also think Apple's just going to release tools for Vision Pro. Like if you, my feeling on Vision Pro was that it is just a step in what is going to be more of the ecosystem play. And for me, I'm more interested in where the OS is going for Vision Pro than I am specifically about the hardware. I am a proponent that like I've had every HMD there is under the sun and used it in every different way. I think people are still not wanting to put expensive, heavy goggles on their face. And it's still an evolutionary step, you know, until it gets to I don't even want to say sunglasses, because some people didn't even want to put stereo, whether they be passive or anaglyph glasses, on their faces for for stereo films. You know, we're talking about real time, foveated, rendered, you know, projection back onto your pupil. And until you have that in smart cities, that there are, unfortunately, cameras or, you know, projection devices everywhere, we're still quite a ways away from having something like that. But like I said, you can see the breadcrumbs to say that, you know, if theaters or something like a crazy like MSG Sphere can use technology to basically track your eyes in real time and project back pixels to it at a scalable level, be it foveated rendering or some other new type of rendering, then you start to go like, oh, like that could be some interesting tech to get into. And we're still away from something
Yeah.
like that, but
No,
there's little pieces of tech that are out there like that, and you go, okay, in 10 years, this is going to be like the shit.
it's honestly, there's so much more coming out, and I didn't expect this, but Jim, there's so much we want to talk to you about. We have like at least 10 other topics that we haven't even touched on, and I definitely would want to plan another episode. But one thing I want to
Sure.
say is, can we have a rapid fire section? Because we have some questions
Let's do
that
it.
people ask on our stories and in threads. So we'll do like a rapid fire and just make sure we can approach as many as possible with you answering them, because I think there's a couple of really good questions that can help and benefit a lot of people. And with your experience, this is like the best time to do it. Should we do that right now?
Let's do it.
Okay. Farah, you want to go first?
Yeah,
or
you can go first. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So Sebastian Joseph asks, apart from Unreal Engine, what other software is used to make a virtual production setup that they might need to look into if they're getting started?
Pretty much everything under the sun. Like in a traditional workflow for virtual production, you're going to touch other DCC tools that you may already be using. Blender, Maya, Cinema 4D, ZBrush, like it's going to touch a lot of the tools that are existing and have existing workflows. So you can still get into a virtual production role, be it on VAD or previs or post-viz, with some of those skills that you may already have.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Okay.
I got a very interesting one. Someone asked, can you imagine films and video games blend together as a new medium? Now that we have, game engine coming to production, I assume what they think of is now you have created the film, you have the set, you have the environment. Why not? I can go inside and, play.
Add a third-person blueprint and make it a game.
I think we've seen steps of that happen. Like we've seen things like Netflix experimenting with like the choose your own adventure. I go back to like the Tom Hanks movie in Big, where like the comic book that he wanted to create when he got big was this like interactive choose your own adventure. And I know we've faced it in like VR and AR for a while, but yes, I think we're seeing hybrids of the streaming platforms and other film things of like, how do you tie the story in? Because as a, person that's invested in like a series, like, whether it be Star Wars or new IP, maybe it's the Gareth Edwards like creator that expands into a bigger universe. Marvel's the perfect example of this, of like, you have all this original IP. How do you keep your community involved past just like the film, and it's like, where do you take the story? Do you take the story from, the movie theater back home to like a device like a Vision Pro or, your iPhone? And how do you keep the person engaged throughout a story arc and a storyline to keep them invested, to keep coming back to the, it's like the Indiana Jones thing. Even though we just got the last one, you've spanned of like 40 years of, a career and a storyline to like, how do you keep coming back to it? So yeah, hands down, we'll see more of gaming and filmmaking get tighter.
I love that. We have another one from Pictori Studio that says, is it possible to shoot without Vive or any other tracker for a virtual camera?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can use your iPhone as a tracker. There's some other iOS tools out there that you can use to, record tracking data to the camera and then get the tracking data into something like Unreal Engine. The Vive Mars is a great like barrier to entry because it's, it's like it's $5,000 for like a kit. And, even if you didn't have the full gen locked Mars system, you can still use something like a Vive tracker and base stations to get data.
How much would that
camera.
be to get? Do you know roughly how much it is to get a Vive tracker and a base station? That should be not around 5,000, right?
No, it's for the Vive Mars, the whole kit that HTC sells. That's a $5,000, like all encompassing, comes in a Pelican case with, with the hub that allows you to run the Vive system with the base stations, the tracker, and you need a couple extra pieces for gen locking and SDI connections. But if you just wanted to get started and you had, at minimum two Vive base station 2.0s and like a tracker 3.0, you can do a track camera, like you can even use the puck, as your camera. You just need to bind it to like your cine camera actor and setup, your Vive setup. But like there's ways to do it on the cheap.
I just out of curiosity for ourselves, because we haven't really played around a lot with the virtual camera setup. Would you recommend, if someone has a budget of, let's say, 1,500, 2,000, and they want to get into it, would you recommend them getting an iPad, which has like the big display, and there's an application for you to connect, or would you recommend them going to the basic Vive tracker setup that you just mentioned?
You can just use an iPad or your iPhone and use the VCam plugin directly within Unreal Engine, and if you just want to use it as a visualizer and get track data and set up, take recorder to do the takes for your scenes, you can just use an iOS device in that way. Super easy. And if you want to take the next step, then you go towards things like, to Vive, and then you start stepping up into the bigger realms of camera tracking capability when you start moving towards like optical based or marker based tracking systems.
Honestly, I think there is no excuse for people to do not start on the things that they want to do. Like all these company providing all these tools, and many of the things that we mentioned today, right? Phone, laptop, camera. I think potentially everyone has one at their home. They just need to, download some application and software and start, using it. But
it's just a quick YouTube search away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Someone asked about the dynamic lighting, because when there is a set of virtual production, I think what they assume is how do they change lighting based on the scene when the action is happening.
So then we start getting into fun talks of like LOD structure and optimization, and baked versus dynamic lighting is always a hot topic, because that's usually what breaks a scene is the lighting. It's not only, materials and textures of things that are like photoreal versus stylistic, but for me, coming from a background in cinematography, is lighting is a dead giveaway to something that looks like a bad broadcast key from like the 90s, shot on, not properly lit green screen. But you're trying to create this separation, you're pairing camera within lighting, and we've all seen it. We've seen a lot of the good demos and bad demos, and we've seen really good stuff, done well on an LED wall for ICVFX. The choice about dynamic lighting versus baked lighting is always, the hot topic of that. It's based off of the scene and how the scene needs to be performant on the day, especially for ICVFX. So if the way that you approach, and this is why it always comes down to like a team thing and experimenting, whether you're indie level or you're like, full ICVFX on set, VP team, is, you're approaching optimization to know like what is in the field of view, like what is in your frustum, if everything outside of your inner frustum is not, being captured final pixel, then your LOD structure for that can be much, much lower, where your detail level doesn't need to be because you're not capturing there. So that comes into like a good understanding of like how your lighting team within BAD and how you are approaching your lighting and your scene approach to building. Because if you that's one thing. It's like a lot of people think virtual production is, hey, just go out to the marketplace, get Unreal assets, and just throw it up on the wall. I would say more than half of the assets that are out on the marketplace and available, Turbo Squid and all that, they're not built for virtual production. They're built for either gaming, they're built for, they have a different LOD structure, they have, maybe the textures are much lower quality than they need to be. Like, these are the things that people don't fully understand, is like, it's just not a kit bash, 2 LED wall, turn it on, camera, go type of thing. You can kit bash. It's done all the time. You can use Quixel, you can use Kitbash 3D, you can use all these tools, but they do need to be finessed and optimized in a way. And especially in lighting, there's an approach to choosing why you want to choose dynamic lighting. And the key thing to why you want to have dynamic lighting for ICVFX is you're working with other creative production teams. A DP and a director may want to change the time of day. They may want to change something. Once you bake lighting, you've now committed to that. It's rendered out. And that's okay. You can do a mix of baked lighting with dynamic lighting in a certain type of LOD structure, but you take away the creative manipulation that you can, hand an iPad over with the WebKit API to a gaffer and to a DP and be like, you know what? You want the sun to be here. You want the time of day here. We're going to raise the horizon level here. That's a benefit of using, dynamic assets, and especially dynamic lighting versus baked lighting. And the tools are getting better, and we're getting beefier CPUs and beefier, graphics cards, thanks to NVIDIA, to be able to do more of the heavy lifting. And that is also the benefit of going into tools like diving into Lumen and Nanite, is to be able to, increase the poly count or increase our triangles, but not increase the load on the systems, which is why virtual production, we usually need a lot of render nodes to handle not only the end display, but just the scenes in general. So yes, if you can go dynamic lighting, just understand that dynamic lighting has what I call and others refer to as like a scene tax. So every light you throw in, whether it be a rec light, a spotlight, whatever it is, like that lighting is going to have a tax. So understand how to approach lighting the right way is probably one of the key things I can say. Spend more time in Unreal Engine or CG lighting as in general, and understand what the tax is of every asset and every light and every cine camera that you add to a scene.
So
shout
well
out to
said.
Sano for this question. It was an amazing.
So well said, because it goes
I kind of came back
all
to
the
it.
way. Yeah, no, please. It's exactly what you started out with when you were talking about how you get your experience. It's either you got to go work at big studios or smaller studios, boutique studios, to learn all of these things from somebody who's doing it every day. So when you go, you can actually learn all of this, like smaller things about, the light taxing and everything within a week, within the first week, but because you'll see the problems and then you learn them that quickly if you're really curious enough. Or alternatively, if you are somewhere else in the world who do not have access to these studios, the best way is to just do it yourself. Again, going back to what you mentioned, if you try to do this at home and try to have your own setups, you'll quickly understand that the more lights you add, the more taxing you'll have. And also the Unreal Engine documentation, I don't know if you guys know this, but like especially for the 5.2 and everything, they added more stuff, I believe, about rendering and all these sort of light taxes. And just take a read on that, because all of that is extremely helpful. But what a great answer, Jim.
Read it, but experiment. Like, you can set up an end display workflow environment at home. Like you can do it to. I've done it here. Multiple, OLED TVs or just even multiple monitors. I've got, an Asus monitor here and other stuff over here. And it's just like, you can build the baseline of it. And if you get an understanding, because, end display configs, people have the love-hate relationship with setting up end display at times. But there's a lot of good resources, if you don't have that benefit, I know a lot of people get tied up and they're like, well, how do I get experience if I can't get on set and I can't, it's the whole, the like chicken and the egg thing. Just set this stuff up at home, mess around with projectors, hook up multiple monitors, play around with the stuff, like dissect and read the documentation. Sometimes the documentation doesn't have everything in there and you're going to get caught up, and usually you do like one quick YouTube search and be like, oh, somebody posted this one thing that I'm going through. Just get good at researching. That's because the answers are usually out there.
That's extremely true.
There is one more question. I think it's the final question. I think I'm not sure. It's related to one of your tweets that you made yesterday. So the question goes: how fast can you move the cameras before busting the trackers? And then you were tweeting yesterday about a video that Marcus Brownlee posted about, the 120 frames, that the whole LED is 120 frames. You can have 60 frames shooting with a different background, and other 60 frame is shooting with a blue background.
You mentioned something about ghosting that might have not been, described properly. Maybe you can clarify that for us.
Yeah. So the way, there's a couple things and pieces of technology. More than likely, when Marquez and Cleo were at that XR stage, is there's certain processors that have features, and then there's some other tools out there. Like GoStream just happens to be one type of technology, which is in another way, pulling from like the stereoscopic days that we used to like interleave frames, like doing over under. What the benefit and what that video that Marquez and Cleo had showed at Zero Space was this technology that, instead of having having to do 3 takes and then do 1 to 2 safety takes and then put up a green screen or a blue screen, just as, we do quite a lot on LED walls. It's a way to just do safety takes or, give production options, to get stuff is, it is a piece of, broadcast technology and a little bit of production tech in the background is that, what they're doing is it's a higher refresh rate of being able to kind of interleave frames. So like the frames are, kind of flashing, and there's a limitation to that. There's also disadvantages to it. Is currently for feature films and for episodic, that technology doesn't work because there's certain limitations to the shooting style, the frame rates, the shutter angles you can shoot at, and it works well for like studio environments, broadcast, and like agency commercial type shoots can use this technology right now. They do a bit of I want to say like dark magic in the way that they approach how they can interleave the framing at the same time as the multi-camera example that they're doing is being that they can overdrive the processors at a higher refresh rate. There's limitations of what the camera can do, of what the processor can do, and what the LED tiles can do. So when I say that it's got certain restrictions, is like that technology will catch up. You'll be able to hit different shutter angles. You'll be able to hit higher, frame rates. You'll be able to pack more data through the pipe to be able to use it. And that, that technology is being used, like, ESPN and other broadcasters are using it for their stuff because it would be great that for every frame that you're shooting, you could potentially have a green frame with tracking markers or a blue frame or another plate. We see it tend to happen in live broadcast first, then things, or sometimes it might be done on a feature film and then broadcast will take it or vice versa. But it plays really well for that because in a studio environment, you can control a lot of things for broadcast or for some type of TV show. And, you can lock down the technology because if it's like episodic or it's a show that shoots all the time, you can lock down the workflow pretty well. And the approach that they're using is in a multi-camera scenario is if A camera is on the wide shooting like on a 24 and B camera is shooting the tights on like an 85, but you want a different background on the 85 than you do for the 24, that technology can kind of play well to say like, hey, there's this correspondent that's over here. We want to make them look like they're, at this location. They're supposed to be at the Eiffel Tower. But then this person's supposed to be, back in New York City shooting that. So there's advantages to that too. It hasn't gotten to the level and to the ease of use, I'd say, of like how fast sometimes things like commercials and feature films need to work, jumping from set to set to set. But it'll get there. But it is a cool piece of technology. If people look it up, like one form of it's called ghost frame. The other side of it is probably what they were showing might have been coming from the Brompton processors and what they're capable of doing. It's a different name that Brompton has than ghost frame has, and it still uses expensive equipment to pull off stuff like that. But it is a very cool approach, and if you could tell. Somebody they could, a producer, a showrunner, a director, like, hey, you can get your green screen shots in the same time you're doing that. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's going to save a ton of money. It'll get there. It'll get there. We're seeing these evolutionary steps of it yet. But the cool, I did tweet it out there that, people like Marquez and Casey Neistat and some of these other YouTubers and storytellers that, introduce new tech to different communities and different people. Cause it's like the people that see the video of Marquez today versus like, following what Marquez was doing early on in his career, like when he started getting into like, red cameras and then motion control robots and, and then, virtual production. The same thing for Linus Tech Tips. It's like, hey, everybody's paying attention to virtual production. And then, the YouTubers are using it and they're like, oh, well, what if we set it up there? And it's like, Linus's was like with the Mars system for green screen. That's one workflow. Marquez's at the LED space at Zero Space, different like XR, that setup is more of a setup for like agency commercial brand work, versus like a LED volume that more we would use for like feature films or, car process stuff. It's like an erector set, different configurations for different use cases.
Wow. Thank you so much for that explanation. And what was funny is at the end of the video, Marcus was saying, and he said this multiple times, that I want to have this set up in my studio.
Of course he does.
Yeah. But like you mentioned, the costs are like
thousands,
just stupendous figures. But he probably can afford them. I don't know. I mean, he probably makes a shitload of money. So I don't know how much
there's a benefit. He has some really, like he's got a motion control robot sitting at his place. and it's like not every, YouTuber, but he, he is a different type of YouTuber / production company now. I wouldn't imagine that he wouldn't have, something like that. I think, these content creators these days that have now evolved from just himself doing, tech tips and
tech
like,
reviews,
hey, here's the new iPhone thing, to like having a full blown production company that works with these brand partnership deals. And his videos are really slick and they're polished. And, him and a lot of other YouTubers and social media, production companies that have kind of come up out of this, like they make a good living and they do really great content. His videos are enjoyable. I got to work with him a little bit at GoPro. A lot of them with like the guys at Corridor and Casey Neistat and Marquez and a bunch of them, of like seating them cameras and kind of like, being able to show them how to do things with GoPros. But you look at that and you look at like Marquez going like, hey, I may use this, or Linus going like, hey, we would use this. It's like, they don't have to build physical sets, or maybe they have to build partial. It's like right now, I could easily have, usually on Zoom, I do it and I bring in a different background and you can run, through these platforms, and we can all have virtual backgrounds and make it look like, hey, we're, in some posh place where we're just like sitting in our home office. So yeah, it's technology, it's really cool to get excited about this stuff. But yeah, if Marquez does have one, he can always give me a ring and I can give him some tips on how to be efficient with his LOD structures.
You would probably be the best person to talk to about that. But, all in all, Jim, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. We honestly covered so many different topics, and I hope the people who are watching can really take down some of the stuff that you talked about virtual production, about being a VFX supervisor, and about how they can get into this. And that was the main point of the conversation today, to give people an inspiration and motivation. And if they're already inspired and motivated, give them a path to begin with, so that they can follow in your footsteps and get to the positions that you've gotten to in your career. And so I just want to say a big thank you to you. We'll take the links of your profile, on Threads on Twitter and all that.
Now we're all on
put
Threads,
We have to be, right? We'll put it down in the links in the comments below, and also some of the other stuff that you mentioned about, John's podcast and all that, all the cool links and the cool videos that you just talked about.
Yeah, we can definitely
afterwards.
share those out.
Yeah.
And I think for people, it's very important, I think, to follow Jim on Twitter. He's
at Filmbot, right? At Filmbot.
At Filmbot, he's sharing.
Filmbot is me on Instagram and Twitter. And, the Filmbot name is a funny thing because it's always gets confused of like, I think I have a shadow ban that they think I'm some kind of like chat bot because I don't have my like. I've been film bot since like I don't know. It came off of like an email, which is funny because back to the skateboard thing is a friend had something back in the day called Filmbot Files, which is this like this whole thing. It was like a skateboard brand and would be skateboard videos. So people always equate that like, oh, are you the same Filmbot? And it's like my friend and I always get confused with each other of like the Filmbot Files for the skate stuff versus just like the regular Filmbot stuff. But it's supposed to be a play on like filming robot because all I did was just like go around with the camera and film things and always had cameras. So that's where the whole kind of Filmbot name is. So yeah, Instagram and Threads now since it just goes over in Twitter and same thing. It's like you can find me. I'm out there.
We'll let people know and guys go ahead and give Filmbot a follow because he does post a lot of crazy stuff, and for you guys that want to get updated, one of the best places is his profile. But thank you again, Jim. We'll definitely talk to you and have another episode, potentially maybe even after SIGGRAPH, maybe before. We'll see how it goes, but would love to continue the conversation and maybe talk about some of the things that we missed out on today. And for everybody watching, thank you so much for staying through. We'll see you guys next week. Until then, ciao.